in today's world, we're all about what's broken about us instead of what is brilliant and divine. Imagine that we could help people experience that inner stillness, that physiological stillness, even if just for one day.
Awakening is never just personal. It's part of a greater healing. When we choose to embody grace, every step we take becomes an act of service.
The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. How does one individual carry the weight of humanity's deepest wounds and still meet them with grace, compassion, and unshakable presence? Dr. Lori Leyden is an internationally hailed trauma healing pioneer. She's a transformational leader and a visionary spiritual mentor whose work has taken her from Rwanda genocide survivors to Newtown and Parkland school shooting families. The creator of the Embodying Grace HeartMAP, founder of the Mastering Therapeutic Presence program, and a proud member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, Dr. Leyden joins me today to share her 10 best spiritual books, the wisdom they've gifted her, and how they've shaped her extraordinary journey of service, resilience, and grace. Dr. Lori Leyden, welcome.
Hi, Sandie. It is such an honor to be on this program, and I'm really excited to see what is going to emerge.
Me too. And it's an honor to have you here, believe me, especially after watching your documentary, which we'll talk a bit more about later. So first of all, tell us about the role that books have played in your life.
Yes. It's almost as if from a very early age, my heart would have a question, and I found the books. And I remember I was in the 8th grade and I had read all of the books for in the children's section, and I got special dispensation to go into the adult section, where I really went headlong into really amazing things like Edgar Cayce and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which aren't even on my list, but it was as if they were answering these questions I had in my heart. And I had a troubled childhood, so books were my escape. They were my family. They were my ability to express my emotions, as they came off the page. And so they were a great comfort. They're exciting. They validated my dreams and before I knew I had an intuition, perhaps. And just the inklings of truth that I found in these places that I couldn't find anywhere else. I remember trying to figure out psychologically what was the matter with me or my family, and just I took Freud's book on dreams, 13 years old, and a dictionary, and for months I tried to figure out from Freud's book on dreams. Now, I mean, our psychology has evolved quite a bit, but this is, just voracious. To me, it's like appetizers, delicious dinners, and amazing desserts. I could go on, but I will say one other thing. Before my near-death experience, I had a library of 4,000 books.
Oh my
and
goodness.
It was as if the books were my brain, and I didn't trust myself to write anything unless I referenced it from a book. And then after the near-death experience, I was able to let go of those books that I was holding on to as my validation. And I'm very selective now because the books I already have will serve me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I understand that.
I bet you do.
So tell me what criteria you used to determine 10 books most influenced your life journey out of all those thousands?
Exactly. And it was no easy task, you know.
Oh,
However,
I know.
I mean, I've already mentioned people who I didn't mention in my list. Again, it's that intuition. This is the book now. And so, you know, when I just think about how do I prioritize them, I meditated a little bit, and then I opened my eyes and I looked around my desk, and those books that were on my desk or standing right out in my bookcase were the ones that I chose. But 10 out of thousands, as you said.
I know. It's a hard task. I really feel bad.
No, you don't.
I don't. No, because I know that once somebody's completed it, they've just had an amazing experience. You know, it's their life they've been looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's such a gift to the rest of us to have these recommendations. So, yeah, no, I'm not. I don't really feel bad. So tell me about the list. The list that you sent it to me, the order, is that, you know, the favorite first, or is that chronological, or just as you thought of them?
Just as I thought of them, because trying to put them in order would be another whole journey, if we will. So yeah, no particular order, but I can certainly remember what was happening in my life at the time, and you know, the importance of the message and getting messages validated for me.
Well, I'm so glad that you've got the Gene Keys on your list, because it's one of my favorites, and Richard is one of my favorite people. The Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose, Richard Rudd, published in 2015.
And so I was introduced to the Gene Keys several times over the years, and it's only in the last, I would say, 3 years that I really did a deep dive. And I was completely gobsmacked, and I don't use that word, by the depth and the accuracy in these things. And what I love about it is shows you your shadow and also your blessings. Which I think is so important, because in today's world, we're all about what's broken about us instead of what is brilliant and divine. And so, you know, when I read the various, under the various topics and my purpose, I was like, are you kidding? Have you been sitting in my closet taking notes? But the depth of appreciation for what is selfless and what is selfish and what service truly is. Well, it's all over my purpose chart. And then you know, I don't even remember all the designations, but purpose and things that will hinder you. It was just astounding. And there was this one piece, of course, it's in service, how important it is to be selfish, meaning to take care of yourself.
Yes.
And of course, I'm laughing as I'm reading, because it's sometimes difficult to take care of yourself when you're doing humanitarian work. But it's been a joy, and you keep going back to it and getting more and more out of it.
That's a good point you raised there. I would imagine that somebody who is doing humanitarian work, devoted their life to it, that you can't turn it off. There is no, I'm going to take a weekend away. You know, it's omnipresent.
Well, luckily I enjoy that, so we're in good shape.
Good. So I have a question about the Gene Keys. And you describe the Gene Keys as a book that you live, breathe, and revisit as an oracle. Can you share a moment when it reflected something back to you in a way that profoundly shifted your path?
You know, there's so many. So purpose, work, and there's a third category that struck me, because when I read them all together, it is such an integration of my life. Things, and it gives me permission to be who I want to be. Even though in many ways, my path is untraditional and non-traditional, and there aren't groups of people that I can sit down with and say, well, what do you think about this situation that happened? Because it's, so outside of the box. But talking about leadership in these things, it was like, because for me, I'm just doing my thing. I don't see the bigger impact necessarily. But I think in really studying this work about my very nature was so validating. Even the shadow stuff, we all have shadow stuff. It was like, it's validating. It's like, and well, I could go on, but it's comforting as well to know that a complete person also needs to deal with every range of human emotion and behavior.
Yeah. So book number 2 is another one of my favorite books, and it comes up pretty frequently. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, published in 1946.
Yes. Honestly, that has to be number 1. And I'm going to get emotional. I was given that book to read again when I was in the 8th grade, 13 years old. And I had read Anne Frank a couple of years before. And at 13, I felt this pain of the genocide that had happened there. And I dove into this book and I read the whole thing, even his logosynthesis part. And I knew on a visceral level that I was connected to this somehow. Now, how would I know that? And this notion that you can find meaning and purpose in the depth of human suffering, it was always right there for me, right? Always right there. And I have read it over and over and over again, only to find myself so many years later helping people heal from genocide. That is not an accident.
Has reading that book shaped the way that you support others?
It certainly has, because in the back of my mind, I'm always able to hold that this person has the resilience and the heart and the soul and the divinity to heal. And so knowing what Viktor Frankl's story is and the so many other stories of survivors, and the fact that research shows that the difference between who died in the camps and who stayed alive were those who found meaning and purpose in this horror that they were living in. And then I began to realize that, you can live in the nightmare or you can live in the dream. And you can be you can be having the same, experience as another, but what is in our hearts and our minds and our bodies is what helps us persevere. So the strength of human will to live and survive and find that meaning, even at the age of 13, has followed me through all these decades.
Book number 3 is The HeartMath Solution, Doc Children and Howard Martin, published in 1999.
And even looking at when they were published and how early on I found them is pretty amazing. And so I'd always followed the HeartMath Institute, and then I had a near-death experience in which I asked to receive more elegant forms of healing for people. And in a series of deep meditations, I received this formula, which we may have time to talk about later, for healing. And when I got out of that meditation, I said, you are either full of you know what, or there's something here. And HeartMath validated what I experienced in these deep meditations about the power of the heart. And that's when I began to really, in my mind, I understand that the heart is really the tool, the physiological organ that hardwires us for our divinity. And the fact that there's an institution out there that's been researching and studying it for 25 years how does that happen? And so my work is very much based on heart, brain, body somatics, which is a word that people are using a lot, but really body-based healing, so
Yes.
that the heart can resonate at the highest coherence level, which they talk about as gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, which is part of the formula for healing that I downloaded. So they are a constant resource, constantly proving what we know spiritually, that we're all connected, we're all one, we all vibrate at the same, essence. But here it is. And we are, in this lifetime, privileged to be bringing forth all of this information that's helping us evolve.
Indeed. Book number 4, The Story of Gaia, The Big Breath and the Evolutionary Journey of Our Conscious Planet. Jude Currivan, Dr. Jude Currivan, published in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you can imagine, so I knew Jude from the Evolutionary Leaders, and she's one of my dear mentors and friends. And I just hold her in my heart in a special way. She and Barbara Marx Hubbard and I spent some time together, and that's a whole nother interview. So imagine I'm in Australia conducting a retreat in this beautiful home way in the boonies of outside of Melbourne. And we had a quiet time, and I was just sitting next to this bookcase doing something, and I turned, and there is Jude's book, The Story of Gaia. Hello, synchronicity. And my heart just like leapt. I almost didn't have to read the book because everything, it was like a transmission of this from an amazing scientist who is helping us marry science and spirituality. And this notion of global oneness and evolution. Like in these, I've read many books from our evolutionary leaders, and they're all beautiful and insightful. This is a poem, I feel, or poetic prose that calls to my heart. And so she is also able to take the most complicated concepts and make them digestible. And that really opened and once again validated my vision for the world and how it might just happen.
Yeah. You've said that this book gave you language for the feminine intelligence of grace. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think Jude herself exudes that. And she is able to exude that through the pages. And so for a long time, for me, I feel like it's time to focus on divine union of masculine and feminine. Will we ever really understand what divine feminine, divine masculine is? But there's a poeticness for the way that the divine feminine is about holding and receiving, and that receptivity that is so sacred that we all have inside of us, whether you're male or female or however you identify. And so to be able to identify the sacredness of that, instead of letting the ego get in and, maybe twist it or turn it. I don't know if that's very specific, but as you can see, it's the experience more than the words from the books, I think, for me anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, some books, like transmissions, you take it in on another level and it lives within you. Book number 5, The Seat of the Soul, Gary Zukav, published in 1989. Why is this one on your list?
I have grace bumps. Another one. I mean, 1999. I got it in 1999, and I was how old I was. But once again, this brilliant man is able to take like quantum physics and put it into something that is consciously palatable, and talking about the soul and the spirit and life and karma all of these things that were kind of like separate entities in a sense, but using quantum physics to bring it all into integration. And it just made my heart leap because it spoke to a part of me that I could never voice before this, because I felt I was a little too out of the box and a little too crazy. And quantum physics at the time was difficult to digest, but Gary put it all together. And there was this notion, it started to make my life make sense. Reincarnation, putting the dots together of, why was genocide this issue for me? And what did that trauma allow me to do and move forward with? So it was a calling from the future almost, if I can.
Yeah. You said that this was a lifeline when you doubted, your path. Was there one specific moment, for you when its message helped you, just keep going when, against everything?
Yeah. It's the higher order, being able to have a perspective of the meaning of life, the purpose of life, even if I don't agree 100% with everything. It's a way to discern. It's a supportive thing that secret in my heart of following my heart is validated by all of the things. I would say that Seat of the Soul is kind of like a quantum physics version of Siddhartha.
The next book is by someone that I consider my the one that got away. The one that I always wanted to interview, Joseph Chilton Pearce, The Biology of Transcendence, published in 2002.
So, my near-death experience was in 2003, and that's when I received this work called the Grace Process, which was a formula. And I went into research of, is this formula even valid? And the heart coherence part of the formula was all about gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, and how they build on each other. And then I find this book that validates like 100% what I'm experiencing, but didn't know. And so here's a man who, can you imagine that, he's talking about joy and wonder as our natural state of being, and our job is to return to that, and then gives us the science to back that up. Once again, how important to integrate science and spirituality.
Yeah, I love all of his books, all of them. Yeah, especially The Magical Child. That one really touches me. Yeah, so book number 7, The Disappearance of the Universe, Gary Vennard, 2003.
Yay! Now, it's a big book, and it's based on A Course in Miracles, and so people who know the Course in Miracles know that it is a channeled book, if you will. But here again, and I'm realizing the theme. Thank you. You're helping me integrate, like you knew that already. In any event, I read the book, and again, it was like, it seems kind of silly, the story in the beginning, but it is about someone coming to trust their awareness of reality that takes many different forms and may not be the reality somebody else is listening or experiencing. But the truth is that after that book, forgiveness is a very big part of my spiritual work and part of my formula. But literally what disappeared for me at the end of that book was even the need to forgive. Now, that's obviously a big topic. Forgiveness is the 4-letter word of spirituality, right? And by that, I mean, if we have a higher order of thinking in the world, if we are able to understand our lives from a divine nature, then there is nothing, whatever happens, you believe that there is some kind of divine order to it. Now, we could talk about genocide and horrific, situations, but this higher order of things to remember. My healing is being able to be response able. And unforgiveness does not allow me to be response able. And so there's this notion of how quickly can you forgive after something happens? Not because we're letting anyone off the hook, but because we're letting ourselves be free from the abuser in our heads, if you will. So very powerful.
That's the key, isn't it? You know, we're freeing ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Book number 8, The Divine Matrix, Greg Braden, published in 2006.
And here again, the grace process formula that we can literally, in order to achieve grace, we partner with the divine. And Greg's book gave me the language and the research and the theory to validate that this part of meeting the divine in the field of the divine, that's where co-creation really happens. And that grace is not something that just an uncertain God doles out willy-nilly. That we can actually choose and harness the energy of grace. And this notion that there is the earth, that there is a electromagnetic field surrounding the earth that matches the human electromagnetic field is mind-blowing, heart-blowing. And the evidence of the divine, I believe that book really helped me understand, which I knew before, but that God is energy, that it is just energy, and I'm playing in God's domain, and we are connected. And so I call the divine one heart now, based on HeartMath and Greg Braden and Joseph Chilton Pierce. And there's much more to support that the brain is not just a pump. And so that was very significant. There were 5 books that validated the grace process, and we've already talked about 3 of them, I think.
So you credit this book with affirming the co-creative power of presence. How has that insight shaped collective projects you're involved in, like the Millions Meditating Alliance?
Well, I really have to go back to Rwanda for that, because I learned presence in spending 3 months preparing to go to Rwanda, not reading books, but having deep, deep meditations in which I could look at where was the killer in me, where was the woman who had survived war and the massacre of her family and was now living with AIDS, and all of the various circumstances I would find myself in. And so it was about being fully present to my own shadow. And also, could I sit with a man who had murdered 100 people? Could I sit with an orphan head of household who was 8 years old at the time of the genocide and given 2 to 6 other children to raise? This book allowed me, it validated that the work was inside and was physiological. So all of these books that we're talking about, it's the physiology to maintain presence. And this is what we want to bring with the Millions Meditating, one of the projects that you and I are both working on, is imagine that we could help people experience that inner stillness, that physiological stillness, even if just for one day.
Yeah. If
millions of people experience that, it could light an evolutionary fire that is what is needed most on the planet. I'm calling it the 5th wave of healing and transformation, is finding that embodied presence.
Book number 9, Transcending the Levels of Consciousness, The Stairway to Enlightenment, by David Hawkins, published in 2005. Now, his books do come up often. Never has this been on the list before, on any list.
This particular one.
This particular one, yeah.
Well, It validates something for me too. Because, of course, I have all of his books. And I mean, the quick thing is his levels of consciousness. The higher levels of consciousness are all gratitude, love, joy, and wonder. But it validated the spiritual search. It validated those, shame, guilt, those lower resonances that interfere with our ability to see God because we're so busy being God in the control mode of things. And so for me, of course, I'm an achiever, so I'm going to achieve my enlightenment, right? I'm going to study every single step of that map of consciousness, and so validating so many of these things. I felt like Pollyanna coming out of the box saying, yes, the grace process is all about gratitude, love, joy, and wonder. It was like, oh, too woo-woo, too, like it was that spiritual bypass. But here is David Hawkins, who's just like, boom. But again, I'm reading what my heart knows, but I never had words for. Yeah. So that's particularly delicious.
Number 10. So this particular author has the most books that have been recommended. He's the author with the most books, but never this book. And it is Interbeing, 14 Guidelines for Engaged Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh, published in 1987.
And this was well before my near-death experience. But again, the simplicity. I'll never forget reading in one of his books, the page, the blank page exercise. What do you see in this blank page? And Thich Nhat Hanh was able to, I see the child who watered the plant that became a tree that, like we think it's a blank piece of paper, and it is full of life. It's full of God. And the notion that spirituality could be simple, that it was about everyday presence, again, mind-boggling. Here we all are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to achieve enlightenment, and just walk this way. Do everything with consciousness, whether it's washing the dishes or doing your prayers or whatever. And so there was I think his spirit really came through. His grace really came through for me in these teachings. And, isn't it interesting? He and the Dalai Lama escaped, tremendous violence and lost everything, truly. And yet they became these two leaders that showed us the power of being happy and having inner peace and inner safety so, of course, I've read his other books as well, but you can see the theme, interconnectedness. I mean,
what does interbeing mean to you in the context of trauma healing and service?
Thank you. So in order for us to reach those places in our hearts, we must regulate our physiology, because trauma creates a brain dysregulation, which very few people understand today. And that the safety and the healing inside of each person is there if we help them self-regulate. And so compassion becomes holding space for the other to find that inner safety and inner peace that exists within them, which then gives us the foundation for the healing to unfold. And so this notion of presence, I am holding, it's an intra and interbeing at the same time. I'm becoming one with this person I'm holding space for, because I see their resilience. I see their divinity. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. It does. Well, that's your 10 books. And having explored your lifelong companions, I want to turn now to your own contribution, your book, Embodying Grace, and also the HeartMAP you've created to help others step into their own healing and awakening. So before we touch on those. Tell me, you've talked about what you felt at the age of 13 and the connection and, Viktor Frankl's book. But what was it that actually made you decide, I am going to work in trauma healing? There must have been a pivotal moment.
It's interesting. I was only ever in search of healing my own trauma. And I somehow knew that in doing that, that would also be part of my service work. But I never realized how significant that was. I remember being in college, and they had this summer course delivered by two professors, one a professor of English who had been in the concentration camps, and the other a political scientist, a professor who had discovered the train receipts that were used at the Nuremberg trials to convict the Nazis. And I was the only non-Jewish person in the room. But there was a visceral, and I've had past life memories of dying in a concentration camp. I know it sounds woo-woo, but it's part of my activation. And so I studied that whole, like everything, the poetry, the films, everything. And then in 2007, when I was setting my intention to find my spiritual romantic partner, and I started to feel this quickening. And then I received an email from someone in Rwanda who had read my first book, The Stress Management Handbook. And they said, can we translate it into Kinyarwanda? And I said, yes. And then I said, what else can I do? And they said, please come here and teach your trauma healing skills. And I went, yes. And then I went, how the am I going to do that? Newly divorced, moved to a new city, trying to build my practice and all of this stuff. But that quickening was this answer. And while I was looking for my spiritual romantic partner, I found Rwanda. Because what else did I do but prepare myself as if for a lover, to be intimate with myself, to go to the depths of what I was needing to get there and be fully present and in wonder. And so while I was a trauma healing person in private practice, this was now like, oh my God, this was my lover. And I fell in love with Rwanda. I fell in love with the smells and the people, and it just felt home. And I never saw a distinction between myself and them. And so I don't know if I answered your question because I got a little passionate there.
That's okay. You're allowed. You've earned it.
I will say this one story about realizing that all the work that I had done through the summer was going to serve me, and that was when I went to a church service in Rwanda, which their church services are like 3.5 hours long, and they're very cathartic. And we know now that catharsis is not good in trauma healing unless you're doing some body release work. But I was not going to give a lecture or teach or speak unless I had been involved in the culture. And so I sat in the back of this room, all eyes, 300 people, and the white chick in the back of the room with no translator. So afterwards, a group of about a dozen women surrounded me, very skeptical, suspicious, what are you doing here kind of thing. And they were clearly women living with AIDS and other tortures of the genocide. And this woman stepped forward and she took down her blouse and showed me her mutilated chest. And I stood there and everything dropped away. There was no egoic grabbing for What am I going to give her? How am I going to fix it? It was simply this presence. And I took her hand and put it to my chest, and I put my hand to her chest, and we just stared into each other's eyes. And I saw my own soul in her. And she gave me this gift of receiving from me. There was nothing we could give each other except this moment of peace. And grace dropped over me in a way I had never experienced before. I was aware of nothing but this woman. And when we felt complete, we stepped back, and I looked at the faces of the other women, and people were smiling, and there was this connection, and we never said a word to each other. And that's where I learned that presence heals me as much as it heals the other person. I'm a crier, Sandie.
That's also okay. So in Embodying Grace, you talk about the heart-brain-body connection. How can ordinary people begin practicing this in daily life?
Thank you. So I'm a big person of saying, stop your spiritual practices now, because if you get off the yoga mat and you kick the cat or you yell at your partner, your spiritual practices are not working. The simplest way to regulate your physiology is to simply take those deep diaphragmatic breaths. And so that's the place, is with our breathing. We don't even know how stressed we are day to day. So I ask people, I'll give you a simple exercise. You just place your hand on your heart, focus on your inhales and your exhales, and breathe as if through a straw so that you can hear, am I really taking that full inhale and full exhale? And in that, if you practice that every day for 2 minutes, 6 or 8 times during the day, you will change. You will reset your physiology. You will see the difference, becoming less reactive, more response-able. So it starts with the breath and nurturing that breath and our physiology. That's the heart, brain, body part of the formula, the HeartMAP formula. The second step, and there are many other ways, I call them energy shifters: dance, movement, song, the whole thing, as long as your physiology comes down. Second step in the HeartMAP is to notice which part of the 5 stages of my spiritual growth am I exhibiting in this moment. So, for example, I guarantee you that if you're not breathing properly, your mind is probably racing, you're probably ruminating about something, having a conversation in your head with someone. That's stirring, right? That's a disconnection from the divine. But then I'm teaching people how to surrender. Not surrender to give up, but surrender to give in to their divine nature. And in that place, presence begins to become more available to us. And then that allows us to move into stillness, where I believe we are truly connected with our divine genius, because the heart is now communicating with the prefrontal cortex. And that's where the access to our divine nature of intuition, problem solving, transcendence, and creativity is allowed to flow through us. And then the third part of it is this formula I've been alluding to, which is the grace process, which is we start with an intention. What is it that we want the freedom from? So we have the freedom to. And we're choosing that, an active choice. And then we have to transcend our egos in order to live with heart coherence. And that involves moving from releasing our judgments and moving into discernment. And then a big piece is this forgiveness piece, because that allows the heart to be free then to achieve those higher resonances. And I know for me, as soon as my ego drops away, that's when I can receive grace. So do I want to hang out in the dark night of the soul? Do I want to be in great physical pain and in the uncertainty of when grace is going to drop in? Or would I like to hang out in gratitude, love, joy, and wonder and solve my problems and my physiological dysregulation from there. I don't know. What do you choose, Sandie?
Yeah. Well, I know what I'd like to choose. I'm not always successful. But
It's a practice.
it is a practice. It is a lifelong practice. Yeah. Yeah. What role do you see for grace in global transformation beyond individual healing?
Yeah. Well, what grace does is remind us that we are truly connected to the divine, that we truly are divine in ourselves. And I think of grace not attached to any religion. And isn't it interesting? I was reluctant to call this thing the grace process because I thought it was too religious 20 years ago. And the message was, calm down, just do it. And here we are in a world where that word grace is being used as part of the vernacular. What do we need? We need to be able to separate. I mean, we have to heal the wound of separation from the divine. And by doing that, we open to this surrender and stillness where then we can actually synergize internally and externally with those groups that share our same passion. And together, as that wound has been healed of separation, that's the momentum. And that's what I think is grace, the synergy of the heart, brain, body connection inside of ourselves and in connection with each other. And how else we need that inner safety to even want to, I don't want to use the word fight, advocate for global healing. We need to have that sense of inner safety, and in the mystery of the uncertainty, instead of having it trigger our egos, we can have it trigger our hearts, and our hearts can be blown open to what's possible.
You know, we human beings, we do anything to avoid discomfort, pain. You put yourself in the way of that all the time. When you're in Rwanda, when you're, at Parkland with the families, when you're with Scarlett, Lewis and, Sandy Hook, how do you cope with that pain? Because you must feel their pain.
Yeah. Well, I distinguish between pain and suffering. So pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Suffering comes from the stories we tell ourselves about what we are experiencing. And why I can have deep, deep compassion, the deepest compassion, the physiological regulation of being present is the medicine. And so that's the only thing I can say that allows me to be present, is doing my own work first, and clearing any judgments I have about the situation, the people. For me, everyone is a victim in those communities. Everyone was triggered in those communities, and the shooters and their families are also victims. And so being able to see the bigger picture, or having a spiritual foundation, I don't have all the answers, but I do know to trust what I don't know. And so all I know when I'm with these people is, how can I help them find that place of inner safety, which I know is the answer. And it frees the brain to then realize that they're safe, that they maybe did the right thing in the moment, or whatever they were questioning or worried about, they received this grace of understanding. And I know that's the biggest gift. And because I receive something too, it's like I'm excited to get into that infinity circuit where there appears to be a giver, there appears to be a receiver, but we meet in that sweet spot in the middle, and there's only love, and we're all transformed, and we have access to what we need in the moment, whatever that might be. So I mean, sure, do I do a lot of self-care? And are there times when there might be some profanity involved? There might be some, wild shrieks. There might be some ranting. But I limit it because I don't want to go too far. So, of course, there's the human side of it.
Tell us a little bit about the documentary. When I was young, I said I would be happy. I was looking at this earlier today, and I don't know what to say. It touched me so, so deeply. And this is something that I think everybody should watch, because we don't have a clue, not a clue. So tell us how that came about, and, some of the wonderful things that you've been doing with some of these children.
Oh, yummy. How much time do we have?
Not a huge amount.
I know. Gosh. So I was sitting on the beach in 2003, and I was visioning things. And this seagull was flying right toward me. And I had this vision of taking grace angels around the world to hot spots around the world for healing. And I instantly had a panic attack. So I was like, that is ridiculous. Now you're losing your mind right now. And 4 years later, I was on the ground in Rwanda with a team of grace angels. And so I had this vision that I went, 3 visits to for a month each. When I came home, the jet lag was like really bad, and it would be 3:00 in the morning, and I'd be watching, for some strange reason, war movies and just crying and sobbing that I can't believe this is still happening in our world. And then as I was dozing, I started to have this notion of a program that I eventually called Project Light, which stands for Heart-Centered Leadership, Inspires Global Healing and Transformation. And I saw trauma healing for traumatized young people so that they could have economic sustainability and become heart-centered leaders, because the next generation is where we need to put our hope and our dreams. And if traumatized children, as I won't get political right now, traumatized children to grow up to be traumatized leaders. Yeah. And so I had this notion, and then I was like, okay, who can do this? Jean Houston can do it. Barbara Marx Hubbard can do it. Angeles Arian can do it. I'm going to call all those women and let them know, this idea that I have, and they'll take it and run with it. So I talked to Barbara, I talked to Angeles, and they both said, you are the one you've been waiting for. And I went, oh,
darn it.
Anyway, go to Rwanda. We picked 12 of the most traumatized orphans of the genocide who have just graduated high school. We put them through a 30-day program that I developed. And then we sponsored them for a year in businesses or university. And it took a lot of money and a lot of fundraising. But these 12, we now call Project Light Ambassadors. And now how many years later are we? Many of them are married. I've adopted them unofficially. So there are 12 of them and 14 grandbabies. But they are leaders in their communities. Every year at the time of the memorial, they will go out into the community and use these trauma healing skills I taught them. And so we had been filming the progress of these 12. And then there was no ending. The ending was not coming to this documentary. And I really had lost the vision I had of Project Light because it was too bigger than me. I couldn't raise the money. But I was also blaming myself for creating this reality that the documentary wasn't being finished. Until I get to Newtown, and a month later we meet Scarlett, and JT, her son, who had lost his brother, was extremely angry, understandable, and depressed, and he did not like this EFT tapping stuff that I was doing with them, and kind of thought the adults were a bit crazy. So he locked himself in his room, and later he came out, and I said, JT, would you like to talk to a couple of my kids in Rwanda? You know, they've experienced what you've experienced. And we set up the Skype call with a translator. We had Chantal and Matthew on the call. And as I was watching the Skype call where these young people, my kids were older than him, but were communicating, and he was fascinated. And I sat back and I started to cry because I realized the vision of connecting traumatized young people around the world for healing was happening right in front of me. And I didn't even know it. And then, of course, that became the ending to the documentary. Divine order, divine intervention, and just, there are no words, really.
Yeah.
But it is available. People can watch it on my website. And to me, the notion of seeing how those 12 paid it forward and continue to, I've hooked them up with Ukrainian refugees. I've hooked them up with schools in the United States where they've inspired young people. They've given speeches at during the race riots here in, was it the summer of 21 or whatever it was. We set up more Skype calls. They got on summits to talk to people in the United States, communities, about healing in their communities. I mean, it's the greatest, it's probably the greatest gift of my life to have these kids.
Mm. You know, I interviewed Scarlett Lewis back in 2017, I think it was, or 18. And, you know, the work that she's been doing in schools all over the country. And she told me about her son, JT, and how challenging it was for him to live with the knowledge that his little brother had been killed. And she told me how JT had been helped. And so she told me about what you were doing, but I didn't know you. So it's a real privilege to have you telling us your side of that. And it is a beautiful end to the movie. It's the perfect end because JT and his friends have found purpose now, and they're raising money to help some of these children.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Extraordinary. And the reason he gave was after that Skype call, I was like, where was he? He was locked in his room. He was now writing a speech that he was going to give the next day at school, telling his classmates why we should care about people around the world who have it worse than they do. He was 13, 12 or 13.
Yeah. So there's a traumatized child, just one who will not grow up to be a traumatized adult because he's found a purpose, you know. Yeah. Viktor Frankl's why. He's found the why. Yeah. So before we close, we always ask our guests this question. Steve Jobs famously gave all of the attendees at his memorial a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. What book would you give to the people at your memorial?
Well, I could be cheeky and say Embodying Grace, trusting yourself, your life, and your divinity.
Yeah, it's your memorial.
I'm going to stay with that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Dr. Lori Leyden, thank you for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for the honor, Sandie. It's a delight anytime we're connected.
Likewise. So, taken together, Dr. Lori Leyden's 10 best books, they weave a thread of meaning from finding purpose in suffering to embracing forgiveness, to living in resonance with the heart and the cosmos, which reveals a simple truth we each must embody. Awakening is never just personal. It's part of a greater healing, When we choose to embody grace, every step we take becomes an act of service, shaping not only our lives, but the future we all share. So think on this. How might your next step become an act of service? And what would change if you lived as though every choice carried the power to shape tomorrow? If you're keen to step into the next level of healing, you can download 2 free ebooks, Mastering Therapeutic Presence and the 5 Stages of Embodied Grace at drlorileyden.com, where you can also watch her award-winning movie, When I Was Young, I Said I Would Be Happy. You can watch that for free, and you can learn more about her work and her book, Embodying Grace. Trust in yourself, your life, and what was the last?
Your divinity.
Your divinity,
The
absolutely.
best bit.
So, drlorileyden.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 Best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and it's a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Lori Leyden.
If today's conversation sparked your curiosity, you'll love our other shows. The Synergy Sessions, where leading-edge thinkers collide in bold, unscripted dialogues that ignite new possibilities. Between Realms and Reason, where we journey into the mysterious consciousness, energy, and the hidden layers of reality, where science converges with spirit in ways you've never imagined. And the No BS Spiritual Book Club, where leading-edge new thought speakers, teachers, authors, and luminaries who've walked this path before you share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on their life journey. All 3 shows are available on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and all major podcast platforms. For more information, visit sedgbeer.com. That's SEDGBEER.com.